Good day. My name is Travis Bembenek. I'm the president and CEO of Mexico News Daily. I live in San Miguel de Allende, and I'm here with my friend George.
I am George Revis. I am an immigrant who has lived in Mexico for about 8 years, and I live in Sayulita, a little beach town on the Pacific coast, and I split my time between here and Mexico City.
Over my 30 years working with Mexico or living in Mexico, one thing I've noticed is a ton of foreigners are confidently wrong about the country. And so when I met George and we started talking and sharing war stories of all the confidently wrong comments we've heard about the country, we thought, why don't we talk about it? And that's why we're here today with the Confidently Wrong podcast.
Today, we're going to be talking about driving in Mexico. And I think both of us have been sort of looking forward to this episode. Might be a little more subjective, but it's something fun to talk about because we both hear people all the time being very confidently wrong about driving in Mexico. So, we're going to just talk a little bit about how driving is different here, whether it's safe or not. Everybody talks about that. What are some other options, maybe public transportation? We'll talk about rental cars a little bit. Then the difference of driving in the city versus some rural areas. And then also, of course, getting pulled over, the federales, the propinas, and then a little bit about road trips. So
there's a lot to unpack here. There's just a ton of...
And we're going to try to keep it into 20 to 30 minutes. But Travis, kick it off and just tell me, how is driving different here?
Well, there's a lot there, but I guess I'd oversimplify it as much as
oversimplify.
possible.
Give me your top 3 or 4 things.
Well, to begin with, I'd say if you love driving in the United States or Canada, you're probably going to like driving in Mexico. If you only sort of like driving in the US and Canada, you may not really like driving here. And if you don't like driving that much in the US or Canada, you're going to hate driving in Mexico. I guess that's where I'd start. And it's really, some people think it's this sort of like, as if you're driving on Mars. It's like completely different and they don't know what to do. It's not that at all. I mean, at the end of the day, driving in Mexico is pretty I would say 80% of what you do driving in Mexico is the same as it is in the US. It's that 20% that we're going to get into today. What is so different in that 20% that can make it sometimes not such a fun experience?
So give me, and this is going to be hard because there are so many differences like we talked about. Give me your top 3. I've got 3 that we'll talk about, but just give me your top 3 off the top of your head.
Well, the first thing is, I would say the quality of the infrastructure when it comes to driving is totally different. So I'm a fast driver in the United States. I've had my share of speeding tickets. In Mexico, you cannot have a mindset of speeding. You just can't. So that's one. The second thing is, I think in the US or Canada, we say, let's be efficient. Let's, work all day and then drive to our destination at night. That is not something at all I think you should consider in Mexico. We can get into that. So I tend to avoid driving at night. And the third thing is this, this topic of the federales, right? I mean, everybody thinks that, within the first mile of driving in Mexico, you're going to be stopped by the police, you're going to be asked to pay a bribe. And so that has not been my experience in 30 years. So I think we should talk about that. But those are sort of 3 high-level initial things I would point out.
So you took that at a sort of a little different slant than the 3 that I have. But one of the 3 that I have are how you will get into the far right lane to turn left sometimes.
Okay, so you're looking a little more technically.
A little more technical. These are just 3, whatever, we're shooting the shit. The other thing is you never know, unless you're familiar with an area, especially where I drive a lot around Puerto Vallarta, you never know if you should get in the far right lane to go left or if you should be in the left lane to go left, because one light you might need to be in the right lane and the next light you might need to be in the left lane. And I've had some very close calls when I first moved here. Now I know, where to be, but I had some very...
Let me just stop you, because you explained it well, but I think I'm going to just explain it a little more, because that to me is the single scariest thing about driving.
That's why I brought it up.
And so again, let's imagine you're driving down the highway and you want to make a left turn. Of course, in the United States or Canada, you stay to the left, and when it's clear, you make the turn. In Mexico, you oftentimes move over to the right while traffic is blowing past you, and then when you're ready, you jackknife across your lane and the other lane.
Yeah, which means sometimes you're cutting across then like 4+ lanes of traffic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you started with scaring the hell out of everybody right away, right off the bat. So,
well, that's one of the reasons my wife refuses to drive here. We won't talk about that. One of the next things I wanted to talk about, and which sort of relates to this, but how a lot of times 2-lane highways are really 3-lane highways. And they're 2 lanes, right? But people will pass and the people on the right sort of will move over, and then the oncoming traffic will also move over, sort of creating this imaginary middle lane to pass people or whatever. But everybody sort of knows and nobody freaks out. Could you imagine in the States if someone was driving literally in the middle of the highway, people would be freaking out. But here it's like, oh no, both cars need to get out of the way. The oncoming traffic and the car you're passing both get out of the way and sort of temporarily create a 3-lane highway. For me, that was terrifying.
So I think the takeaway there is, driving in the shoulder is absolutely normal. And totally. I find myself driving as far over as possible in the shoulder.
Totally. My aunt in San Miguel, whether she's turning or driving on the highway, whatever, she's just always in the shoulder.
I am too now. And I think that kind of points to the one I mentioned where you just drive a little slower. And part of the reason is because there could be a semi driving down that sort of middle lane, which isn't really a lane. It's where you'd think you could drive. But, a bus or a semi could be barreling down that. And so you've just got to be way more aware and alert.
Totally. All right. And my third one.
Your third.
Well, my third one, and you just got back from Oaxaca. So you probably have very recent experience with this. And they're all over Mexico, topes. Or like I like to call them pinche topes. Because they are everywhere, and a lot of times they are totally unmarked. I remember, why I bring up Oaxaca, I remember driving from Puerto Escondido further south, and you're going 60, 70 kilometers an hour in what feels like a main highway, and all of a sudden there will be a very sharp, abrupt tope in the middle of the highway, barely, marked, and I've hit those topes going so fast, I thought like the axle was going to fall out of the car. And
I remember years ago, I hit one literally at night in the Playa del Carmen area. I was probably going 100 kilometers an hour, and just went straight over it, never saw it. It was a rental. Shockingly, it was okay. But yeah, you brought out right away out of the gate sort of 3 technical, very big differences in driving, for sure.
Totally.
So what about mine? I mentioned driving at night. Let's talk about that. Do you drive at night? And what is your thinking on that?
I do drive at night, but I will never drive at night like on a road trip. No. When I am driving at night, I'm on familiar roads. A lot of times we'll have, because I live in Sayulita, it's about 45 minutes to an hour north of Puerto Vallarta. We have events that we have to go to in Puerto Vallarta for kids' schools, for other stuff, and those events will end at 8 or 9, and then you have to drive back at night. I don't like doing that, honestly, but I do it, and I feel relatively safe because I know the roads and, I'm very familiar with it. But,
you brought up a point there, I think, and I think this is an important point to bring up. I don't like driving at night either, and I rarely would do it. but it's not because I'm afraid of my personal safety. It's because I think driving at night in Mexico is far more dangerous. Again,
Yes.
not because I'm going to get robbed or stopped.
No.
It's because of the things we talked about, where there's
The topes,
maybe
the
speed
tight
bumps.
roads. You're coming around a corner on a 2-lane highway, or not even a highway, a 2-lane road, and there's a semi coming at you at 80 kilometers an hour. It's scary. And
So I think a lot of people are wrong in that assessment. They're like, oh, what, am I going to get robbed at night or something? And it's not that's driving my recommendation to not drive at night. It's these things we're talking about. Now, I would never drive on a road trip. Again,
yes, thank you for
there's less
distinguishing
stops.
that, because I think there are times where you're on a road trip in the middle of nowhere, Mexico, in the middle of the night. Yes, I think, we were talking about just being dangerous, from a driving standpoint, but I think it does get dangerous in certain parts of Mexico from whatever, the bandito factor and the checkpoints. And yeah, I would never drive through, on a road trip like that in the middle of the night. I think that's stupid.
Yeah, so just to summarize that driving at night, where I live in San Miguel, if I need to drive to a party or something at night, of course, no problem. Like you said, roads, Sometimes I need to drive back from the Querétaro airport, the Querétaro city, or the airport in the evening, and I'll do it, but I try to avoid it, again, just because of the added stress of driving at night. And then road trips, I would never do at night, more than an hour or something. There's no reason, and you're just asking for higher risk, and higher potential for problems.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. Travis,
Have you ever been in a car accident in Mexico, George?
Sober? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, I mean, I've like backed my car into like a tree or come too close to a wall and scraped the crap out of my truck. But as far as like smashing into somebody else's car, being in a serious accident, no. Okay. Besides driving my golf cart off a cliff and almost dying, but I don't think that's really driving.
That doesn't count. That doesn't count. I haven't either. I have been pulled over a lot, though. A lot. I think I've been driving in Mexico, over the years, 25 years probably. I've rented cars hundreds of times. And, I don't have an exact count, but I've probably been pulled over 15 times, maybe 20 over the years. And how about you? Before I go any further on that, how about you? Have you ever been pulled over?
I've been pulled over 15, under 20 times probably.
Okay. So between the two of us, we've been pulled over a lot. Now, I guess my next question would be, have you ever had to pay when you've been pulled over?
Well, it's funny. I was reading an article in your publication, and I came across this quote, and I don't know who wrote it, but listen to what the guy says. He says, "I have been stopped by Mexican police close to a dozen times in my nearly 30 years of driving in the country, always with rental cars driving short distances, and most of the time because I did something wrong. However, not one single time, not one, have I been asked to pay a bribe or received a ticket." So I don't know who wrote that.
I'm impressed, George. That is actually me. This was not planned. I'm impressed you read that. I've never had to pay. I've never been asked to pay, ever.
So I read that, and I have never been more confident in somebody being confidently wrong than I am now. And
okay. Good to hear.
I think a lot of this too, Travis, has to do with where you are regionally in Mexico, right?
Sure.
I think, in Nayarit, I think, and Jalisco and Puerto Vallarta, I think your odds of getting pulled over are probably 20 times that of San Miguel or other parts of the country.
Fair.
But to prove my point, I don't like single data points. So I put on my WhatsApp group of all my friends in Sayulita, in preparation for this podcast, I put a poll on the WhatsApp group. And I asked people first if they had ever been pulled over in Mexico. Okay. And then second, I said, if you have been pulled over, have you ever paid a bribe, or have you never had to pay a bribe?
Sure.
There were 37 participants in my poll. Okay. 33 out of the 37 had been pulled over in Mexico. That means only 4 people had never been pulled over. One of those is a friend of mine who moved here like 2 months ago. Okay. So only 4 people out of 37 had not been pulled over. Of the 33 people who had been pulled over, every single one of them has paid a bribe. There was not one person who filled out the poll who has been pulled over before and not paid a bribe. So, and then you're going to say,
defend myself.
Yes, and hold on, I'm going to beat you to that punch. So you also said that I think it's because of my fluent Spanish, which I think helps a lot, or doesn't, and let's talk about that. But of these 37 participants, I counted 12 of them are native Spanish speakers, and more speak really good Spanish. So I'm throwing out the argument of, well, I speak perfect Spanish. I would actually argue sometimes I've gotten out of tickets by pretending I speak zero Spanish, and sometimes
but now I think you're just giving bad advice here. So
I've got more advice.
So I mean, your takeaway of your survey, which is cool, I'm glad you did it, is that most people get tickets, and then most of them have to pay when they get a ticket. Or sorry, most people get stopped and then they pay. Right?
Yeah.
And that's your takeaway. And what I had said was, I've been stopped a lot. Most of the time I would say I was speeding, or I went through a stop sign. So, I mean, it was my fault, but I did say I've never had to pay. Now, just unpacking that, it's funny, the advice I hear given to foreigners is sort of, have some money, have 500 pesos or something in your glove box or in your pocket or whatever, and basically, kind of right away just hand them the money and hope you can move on. And I've just never done that. And maybe, I'm not saying that's good or bad advice. I'm saying I've never done that, and I've never had to pay. And now I do think speaking Spanish helps. These encounters oftentimes end up being 30 minutes, 45 minutes, where I'm going back
some
and
time
forth.
Value money, man. Time value money.
I know.
I'd rather pay 500 pesos to be out of 45
valuing my
minutes.
time at $2 an hour or something, but
that's high.
I've just felt like if I wasn't doing something, blatantly over the top wrong, I would question it with the police man or woman, and we've gone back and forth, and ultimately, they've always let me go. I've had some stressful encounters. Like I said, I'm not saying I would recommend that, but I've never been asked. It's not that I refused to pay a bribe. I've never been asked to pay a bribe. And so, I think if you speak Spanish, I guess I would say have the confidence to talk it through the same way you would in the US or Canada. A lot of times what they do is they get you in these really bad dilemmas, right? You're on the way back to the airport, you have a flight to catch, and they say, well, the alternative is we take your plate and you follow us to the courthouse and we go there and solve this. And so they put you in this very stressful situation right away. And so paying something seems like a quick, obvious way to solve it. Like I said, I've not had to do that.
The other thing too is, I don't know, everyone thinks Mexico's so corrupt and blah, 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 this and that. And, I'm not saying that the police are not corrupt at all. I'm not saying that. But I also think that they are so unbelievably underpaid salary-wise that's how they basically make up the deficiency in their salary, by collecting what are bribes or propinas, from the people that they pull over. And as long as the bribe or propina is, relatively about the same amount as what the ticket would actually be, it doesn't bother me that much. What bothers me is when, here's the gringo, this is a 200 peso ticket, I just saw his wallet had 2,500 pesos in it, and then the propina will start at 2,500 pesos, and that pisses me off a little bit. But I don't mind.
I don't think we should advocate on here paying bribes or not paying bribes. I guess what I tell friends when they ask me is just drive like a grandma. Just drive slower, be more cautious, be way more, don't multitask, don't look at your phone, because as we said before, there's more stuff going on, there's more risks. But then also, if you are unfortunate enough to be stopped by a police person, you've got that whole dynamic to deal with, which is not fun. Even if you can talk your way out of it, it's still not fun to sit there for 45 minutes.
Yeah, and the other thing I would tell people is just relax. Don't. That's
a good point.
Don't freak out. Nothing is going to happen. You might waste 45 minutes. You might think you're in trouble. Oh my God, I have an open beer in the side door that I forgot about. They're going to find that. They don't care. Just relax and don't stress out, and everything will be fine. Whether you pay the propina or not, you're not getting kidnapped. You're not getting killed. Just relax. People get pulled over.
I had a case where I was stopped once, and I was talking to them, and I said, and they said, "Why should we let you go? Just without a ticket?" And I said, "Well, blah blah blah." And they said, "In your country, they don't let us go." And so I think what you just said, it's important to relax, but it's also important to remember that we're in some unique times right now where maybe the policeman stopping you has a family member in the U.S. who's not feeling great about the way they're being treated in the U.S. right now. And so there's a lot going on. I think your advice is good, George, and just relax, stay calm, apologize.
Be respectful, treat them how you want to be treated. Yeah, smile, be nice, and it's not going to be a big deal.
Exactly. So what about, let's just switch gears here.
Sure.
Driving in a big city. You said you have a place in Mexico City. Do you drive in Mexico City?
Yes and no. I don't, my truck is in Sayulita, so I do not drive my truck. When we go for summer to Mexico City, I do not drive my truck to Mexico City. So I don't have a car in Mexico City, and I typically take alternative forms of transportation, the bus, subways, primarily Uber because it's, inexpensive. But I have driven a lot in Mexico City because a lot of times for weekends we'll go to Valle de Bravo or Tepoztlan or wherever, for the weekend, and I will rent a car. And I want to talk about car rentals too in a sec, but I'll rent a car, and the rental car place is in the middle of the city, and I have to navigate out of the city and then obviously back into the city when the weekend is over. So I have driven in the city, a lot, and I don't like it. I'll be
the
honest.
advice I give people in Mexico City is don't do it. There's absolutely, there's great Ubers, there's great public transportation. There's just no reason to do it. And even big cities like Guadalajara, Monterrey, Puebla, I really question people. I say, do you really have to drive? The chip in our brain in the U.S. is just that, we want to drive everywhere. And I think you need to have a different chip in Mexico. In the fact that there's really good, reliable, inexpensive public transportation. And then the other thing that you can do in Mexico oftentimes is have a driver drive you around, right? And I'm not trying to sound elitist by doing that or by saying that, but
Too late.
It's relatively unaffordable. If you need to go to a couple places in Mexico City, you could, talk to an Uber driver and negotiate a rate of maybe $15, $20 an hour for them to drive you around. So there's just a lot better options than trying to drive yourself in a massive city with different traffic rules and signals and that kind of thing.
No, I think that's great advice. And like I said, I hate driving in Mexico City, but I do it. My wife hates it. Anyway.
What about renting a car then? You said you do rent cars. I rent cars all the time.
I rent cars all the time. And, I read your article, Travis, in the MND. I think it was like a year old, whatever. But I think the article was absolutely spot on. I personally think it sucks renting cars in Mexico City or in Mexico. I don't think it's all that different than a lot of other countries I've been to when renting cars. Sure, in the States, if you have your like Hertz Gold Card and you travel all the time, you land the plane and you walk out and the keys are already in your car and you take off. But I'm not comparing it to that type of situation. I've just traveled all over the world, and I think sort of anywhere it's kind of the same. The same meaning a huge pain in the ass. And I don't think Mexico, is any different than that. But what you said about, it's $5 a day, but then you get there and the taxes and the fees and the insurance that you have to pay for, it can end up being $80 a day when the quoted rate was $5. I mean, I think that's standard. The whole check out process, the vehicle inspection of the car can take 20 minutes. The amount of signatures, the lines at the desk, what was so right too that you said in your article, you were like, it's not even that the lines are that bad. If you walk up and there's 4 people in front of you, you don't think that's that bad. But the problem is each one of those people might take 45 minutes at the freaking desk. So it is brutal. That being said, and this is not an ad, but I have found this one rental car company in Mexico City called Casanova Rental Car, and I'm not going to say that the check-in or check-out process is any better. It still takes 30 to 45 minutes on both ends, and it's still a pain in the ass. But they just have this transparent pricing where it is like, I don't know, the cheaper cars start at maybe 600 or 700 pesos a day. That includes all of your insurance up to 250 kilometers a day. And it includes everything except gas. And they publish the prices. So you see it and it says, whatever, 600 pesos. And that's what you pay minus gas. And it is so unbelievably refreshing.
Not normal, not typical.
Not normal. And that's why it's just sort of a plug for people who need to rent a car in Mexico City. If you do, Casanova's great. And it's funny because they kind of have
never heard of them, but again, I said don't ever rent a car in Mexico City. So I think
what
you said about renting a car, the most important thing for people to remember is, as George said, renting a car really anywhere outside of the U.S. and Canada is a very different experience. Right, so that's the first thing. Just remember that the check-in process, the checkout are much longer, and I mean, I've personally seen probably hundreds of times people starting their vacation in Mexico arguing with a rental car agent, and so I always, not always, but I've often gotten involved and tried to help them because I mean it's stressful for people to start your trip that way, and I would say, to George's point, did you really think you were going to rent a car for $5 a day?
Totally.
It doesn't make sense. So,
right.
You got to just understand that you're not going to uncover this incredible deal to rent a car for $5 a day. There's insurance, there's just the normal costs of renting. So it's probably going to be in the $50 to $80 a day, all in. And then it'll be fine. And so if you have that mindset that it's going to take a little more time, it's going to cost that 50 to 80 bucks a day I've seen throughout the country. And you just sort of go in with that mindset, I think you're going to be in a better spot. And but I mean, it is stressful. It's getting much better. I've seen over the years, they're adding technology into the rental car operation, so it's getting better, but it's still a shock to the system when you start your vacation and your 2-hour flight from Houston to Cancun. Now you're at the 2.5-hour mark at the rental car center at the Cancun airport, right? And you're just going nuts. It's getting better. Don't be afraid to rent a car at all. It's common, in many of the beach areas, but just bring your patience.
But I would say don't be afraid to, but I would say if you can avoid it, just kind of avoid it. Even in beach areas, like sometimes, a lot of my friends come and they come to surf and they need to drive all the way around and check surf brakes and all that kind of stuff. You definitely need a car for that. But if you're just flying somewhere and you're just driving, from the airport 45 minutes to your house and you're just going to post up on the beach in a little town for a week, don't rent a car. You don't need one.
That's good advice.
So
we try to drive as little as possible. We really,
Yeah.
That's our rule of thumb here. We do
Yeah, I
it when
mean,
we have to.
Travis just takes the MND helicopter for longer distances. It's
Exactly.
easy.
When in
It's
doubt,
easy.
take the chopper. It's much easier. But like,
All right.
just when I go to Mexico City, I go to Mexico City once a month. I have a car. It's a 3-hour drive, and I always take the bus. Always. And
Well,
people are
that's the other
surprised
thing.
at that.
The
They're like, well,
buses are
why?
super nice. I love taking
Exactly.
the bus. I love taking
So
the bus.
it's just a mindset change because people are like, well, that's a short drive. That's an easy drive. You can do it in daylight. It's a nice highway. Why would you do that? And again, I don't take buses ever in the United States, ever. I can't remember when I last took a bus, but I took one last week to Mexico City here. And, it's business people, it's foreigners, it's Mexicans,
Yeah, they're
and it's a
super
great
nice.
experience.
I love the bus. I take it all the
Check out
time to
those
Guadalajara.
options as
Yeah,
well.
totally. So real quick, and we're getting a little long, but just real quick, let's talk about, and we've already touched on this a little bit, just longer road trips, like people driving from the States down through Mexico. Like not, oh, I'm driving from Guadalajara to Puerto Vallarta,
Yeah.
but those longer road trips.
Yeah, so I personally have not done that road trip. I know a lot of people that have, and they stick to some, kind of tried and true best practices, right? So they get up close to the border on day one of their drive, and then they stay on the U.S. side of the border at a Holiday Inn or something, and then during the day, early morning, they cross the border and they drive. And they try to, they obviously stick to the main highways, stick to the toll roads, and drive during daylight and don't speed. And I've talked to many, many people who do that each year, never have a problem. But they don't try taking any risks. They don't say, well, we might be getting in at dusk, but let's try to do a 10-hour drive in a day. They don't do that.
Right.
They just,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's in general okay, but I do think that, and a lot of times gringos or Canadians may not even be aware of it, but I do think, a lot of times you'll go through those checkpoints and it's all in sort of, dudes in uniform, and people will think, oh, that's like a military or government checkpoint, and it's not. You sort of need to be careful and just behave and be nice, and but I think that does happen, and people need to be aware of it and just sort of prepared for it and relax and not freak out when that does happen, because it does.
Yeah, I mean, I've hit real military checkpoints over the years, and the first times I hit them, you think, not hit as in an accident, but I had to stop at them. You think, oh my God, what's going to happen here? I mean, the military and it's a pretty uneventful experience. It's a little scary because you see people, in military uniforms, and I'm talking about real military people, but you just get through it, and they ask you a couple questions, and you just move on. The thing we just touched on briefly, George, is toll roads. Toll roads are expensive in
Oh yeah,
Mexico.
let's actually talk about those.
And so they're expensive, and so you may be
Really
tempted to
expensive.
say, well, maybe I should avoid it. I drove to Puerto Vallarta about a year ago, and round trip from San Miguel was over $200 in tolls. So I mean, they're very expensive, but they're the only option from my standpoint. I mean, you have to stick to those roads. The traffic is less, the quality is better. There's going to be less things on the road. There's rest stops. It just absolutely is by far the safest way to go. And don't say, well, I have time and I'd rather not spend the money, so I'm going to take the side roads. Just don't do it. It's really no reason to do that at all. I don't know if you feel the same, George.
I do. I take them all the time. I mean, if we're leaving from Mexico City and driving to Valle de Bravo, we always take the toll road, but I mean, I think it's between 12 or over 1,200 pesos, and that's a 2-hour drive.
Yeah, so
Which is
$60-$70 for 2 hours.
60, $70 for 2 hours. From Guadalajara now to Puerto Vallarta, that whole highway is fixed. And that's the same. It might be 1,200 to 1,500 pesos just going from Guadalajara to Puerto Vallarta. I mean, it's much more expensive than tolls are in the States. But I agree, it's worth the money. Sometimes they can be dramatically faster. And
Yeah.
I will say those toll roads in general are really nice, like very similar
You
to.
just feel much safer. You feel
Yeah.
much, much safer.
Yeah, very similar to whatever nice roads in Canada and the States and other countries. So yeah, I think they're great, just very expensive.
Well, good. I think to wrap up then, driving in Mexico, it is an adventure in many ways. It's not some out of body foreign experience. You're in a car, you're on the highway, you drive on the same side that you do in the US or Canada. But there are a lot of differences that you got to be aware of. So do your homework. Check your impatience at the door or your
Totally.
the speed, and just take it easier, and you'll be fine. But talk to people in advance who've done the drives you're going to do, get their perspectives, get their advice, read up, and don't be afraid. Just be very informed, and you'll be fine.
100% agree.
Great.
Travis, thanks, man. Great episode. Love talking about driving always.
Until next time. Thanks, George.
All right, man. Take care.